in order for us to be effective in using the 5 steps for emotion coaching, one of the first pre-step is really to check in with yourself and think of situations where you do feel empathy. And probably as a parent, you're feeling empathy and constant stress for your kids probably all the time. But let's take some moments to really take note and write it down that how does a teenager know that we feel empathetic towards them? I know that as parents, as adults, we often tell ourselves that, they know that I'm their parents. They know that I care about them, like I have bought them these things, they have a really great place to live, they have clothes, and, they get whatever they want. And those are great resources that we all need for survival. But we know that for connection and communication, it really comes down to us understanding that our loved ones are here for us, they relate to us, and they feel our pain and suffering. So sometimes we might have to do a bit more than just buying resources to show that empathy for our teenagers. And maybe we can also make an intention that how do we continuously show that to our loved ones that we are empathetic towards ourselves. But I also want to say that, it's a common theme that life is difficult. Pandemic is very challenging. Along with this pandemic, all of us had pre-existing concerns and issues that we all have been dealing with in this world. So I also want you to show kindness to yourself if there are things that come in the way of showing empathy towards your loved ones and your children and your teenagers. So again, if folks would like to put it up in the chat, you're most welcome to. If you don't want to participate, you just want to take a note in your own mind, if you want to write it down. But given, the schedule that you have, the work that you have to do, what are some things that comes in the way of feeling and showing empathy towards your teenagers? And that's really important for us to take note and reflect, because that will tell us clearly what some other things that we might, or our teenagers, or other things in our home and our environment might need to change in order for that empathy to be really felt and to be really shown. So maybe take some time. If you're comfortable, you can share in chat. If you don't want to, that's okay. This could be a personal topic, so there's no expectation that you have to say this out loud. So just take a note that what are some barriers? What are some things that blocks from that empathy to sometimes consistently to be experienced and to shown towards our teens? So in terms of 5 steps, the first step of emotion coaching is what we called attend. And we are attending to our teenagers' behaviors and their signs of showing emotions. And then we attend to our own reaction. So it's sort of like actually 2 mini steps packaged into 1 step. We're learning to pay attention to emotional signals and signs and cues of teenagers. But then we're also pausing, and then we're reflecting like, oh, hey, when my teenager shows this emotion, what is it that I do instantly or immediately? And is that helpful? And if it's not helpful, what else can I do in alternative ways? And if it's helpful, I can continue doing that. There's so many different ways that we can subtly or overtly show our emotions. And it's so tricky because sometimes the external or the outside signs, expressions that you end up seeing may not be actually the exact emotion that they're experiencing. So emotion could get messy, it could get complex, it could get tricky. But for you, when our teenagers are stressed out, they're feeling distress, how do you know? you know, how do their face look like? What are some of their facial expressions? From their eyebrows to their eyes, to the eye contact they're making or they're not making, and overall their body language. Are they more engaging towards you? Are they withdrawing? Are they walking away from you? How, from their shoulders to what they're doing with their arms, how they're walking, how they're talking, the tone of their voice. All of these little things, which may be sometimes minor and easy to miss, they could all be giving us some silent signs of what not just teenagers, but individuals all around us are feeling. If you think about how maybe your face looks like, what are some of your facial expressions? If you get up tomorrow morning and you have an unexpected gift from your best friend, how would your lips look? How would your cheeks look? How would your eyes look? How would your body language look? Versus if you get up in the morning and if you get a news that somebody who you know dearly is having a health struggle, how would your facial and your body language change depending on what emotions you're feeling? Sometimes we might be having a whole set of emotions. We might be angry, scared, sad at the same time. At the same time, think about your teenagers. Two different drastic situations. Your teenager finding out that they got an A+ on their math test versus they just found out that they really wanted to go to their best friend's birthday party, but now they can't. They don't really understand the reason why they cannot go to the birthday party, but they cannot. It's their best friend. Just from their facial expression and body language, how do you know? And sometimes teenagers may make it easier for us, and they might give us very obvious signals and signs that they're having some big stressful emotions. Physical actions like kicking something, slamming the door, throwing something. Even teenagers sometimes could cry, scream at you. They might say negative things about themselves. This will never work out. I will end up in your basement. What's the point of working? I'm not going to try. Who cares? What's the point of going to school? What's the point of doing this? Who cares? Sometimes they actually might make threats. If you don't do this, I'm going to run away. If you don't do this, you will never see me. I will just leave the house. And sometimes they might also personally attack you. You don't love me. That's why you wouldn't let me go to my friend's house. You don't care about me. You don't care about my emotions. You don't worry about what will happen to me and what will my friends say. You're horrible parents. You don't understand. You don't get anything about me. So these personal attacks, threats, negative statements are very much signals and signs that your teenagers are indirectly but desperately giving you that they're emotionally distressed. But maybe think of a time, when you might have seen some of these obvious signs and signals, whether it's physical actions, crying, screaming, really heartening, sad statements about themselves, threatening you that they will do something. Sometimes we might get so angry that we might say, like, I'm just going to hurt myself and then watch, right? So they make sometimes quite emotional and painful demands. Have you heard that? And if our teenagers are giving such desperate and obvious signs that they're emotionally so stressed out, what do you think is the emotion? How do you think they're actually feeling? It may seem like they're hating you, they don't like you, they don't appreciate you, but many of the times personal attacks are very much packaged in a hidden message that I am ashamed that I did that. I am sad that this is happening to me. I am angry that you're coming into my space. I'm scared that something bad will happen, right? Here is a list of reactions that, adults, parents, teachers, even towards our loved ones, we might have. And it's not necessarily that these are bad reactions. These are very valid, normal, immediate reactions. But what we're going to learn today is maybe the timing of this reaction sometimes is not as effective as we want them to be. So if we see our teenagers, they're really, really stressed out, they're having big stressful emotions, that's where your empathy gets operated, right? As a parent, it's probably so hard when you see your child in pain. It is your parental instinct to protect them, to make their pain, their grief, their suffering go away. And of course that makes sense, right? So it's so obvious that why sometimes our immediate reaction is we want to tell our child that this will also pass away. You will not be stressed all the time and everything will be okay, right? We go to problem solving right away. We don't take a moment to pause to really understand what emotion is going on. But as a parent, and makes sense, we just want to protect and we just want to reassure them that don't worry about it. We got this. Sometimes maybe we don't want to overwhelm our child. Maybe we know in our head internally, like, oh gosh, this is a big deal, but I want to protect my child. And I just want to be like, oh, no, don't worry about this. This is actually not a big deal. Like, we'll find a solution right away. Like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So we really downplay the problem. But I get it. It's because it comes from that lens of empathy, right? It comes from that lens of really trying to protect our child. And some of us wants to get on this problem solving right away. Oh, you're stressed out. You're sad about your grade. You're sad that you're not getting a job. You're sad about this. Bring your paper and pencil, bring your laptop. We're going to sit down right away and just solve the problem right now. Some of us may think, like, if they're really, really sad, they had a breakup or their friends are not talking to them or they have gone through a huge loss, let's just try to create more happy memories right away. Let's do something fun. Do you want to watch a movie? Should we go to the mall? Should we go to a nice restaurant? Sometimes we just want to assure them that they have so many qualities that would help them to solve this problem. You're so smart. You're so kind. We want to remind them that you have gone through worse. This is nothing. This is another math test. This is another grade. We will get through this. And on the other flip hand, and this is so normal, I have heard this as a teenager, and I can get this when there is big emotions and your brain is stressed out, their brain is stressed out. We think about negotiation, because at that point, we just want the anger, we want that screaming, we want that slamming of the door to stop. And we negotiate that, if you calm down, you can have your phone back. If you calm down, you could go to a friend's house. If you calm down, you can go do that. Or sometimes we just have to give ultimatums because we just want that tension to calm down. So you will no longer have internet if you don't stop screaming. You will not be allowed to go to your friend's house. Now, again, these reactions sometimes are so fair, valid. This is what the resources that you have at that moment. So we're not going to debate about, whether or not these reactions are good or bad. Sometimes you need to fix the problem. Sometimes you need to remind the youth that, they have so many other strengths and they can use their strengths to solve that problem. Maybe sometimes you have youth who are really magnifying and catastrophizing all the problems. I need to remind them that things have been okay before and things will be okay. But when our emotion, when teenagers are at that state, like we talked about last week, that when we are thinking from our emotional centers in the brain, a situation or a series of situations has happened where we are emotionally really, really stressed out. That is not the time when the teenagers will have the resources to think from the front of the brain, to sit down, calm down right away, to fix the problem with you. They might actually get more irritated if you say things like, let's do something fun. Let's go for a walk. Because emotions need to be managed and regulated first, so they can come back to thinking from the front of the brain to actually respond to some of these reactions, which makes sense. So before we go to our immediate problem solving, we miss a skill. And that skill is to relate and connect with the emotions. And why is it important that before we go into problem solving, we engage in emotion-focused communication? Because last week that we learned is our teenagers are doing fascinating, very, very cool things, right? Brain is remodeling, brain is growing, their thinking is advancing. But we also know that the emotional centers is also growing, but it's not also remodeling at the same rate. And we need the front of our brain that does self-monitoring, decision-making, risk management. And we really need the connections between the front of the brain and the emotional centers to get stronger, to really help us understand what emotions we're feeling, how do we manage those emotions. So engaging in that emotion-focused communication before we go on to problem solving is providing such short yet rich opportunities for teenagers to learn about their emotions. So these strategies will be really quick, but these are opportunities for teenagers before they launch into their adulthood to be okay, to be vulnerable, to be curious and open about their own emotional experience. Because if you're not open about your emotional experience first, we actually wouldn't even know how to label or name our emotions and then how to solve and manage them. So that's why focusing on emotions first, helping those emotions to go down a bit so that the brain is ready for problem solving will be more effective in the long term. If you see your teenagers having really, really big, stressful emotion, as a parent, let's take a note of what is the situation? What is going on for this teenager? That situation might give us some hint about what our teenagers are feeling. So again, there's so many different types of emotions, but we talk about these are the basic foundational emotions that we experience. And here are some situations that might elicit different types of emotions in teenagers or any individuals. We have anger, we have sadness, we have fear, we have happy, feeling loved, and feeling shame. And last week, we also did a brief exercise where we wrote down how do our teenagers express each of these emotions. So, and I know you have these slides. So this might be a nice guide for you to really understand what is the situation for our teenagers. And once you have some idea of the emotion situation, but sometimes you might not, right? Because we also hear that sometimes teenagers don't like sharing anything with their parents. And that's actually more common than we think it is. They might come home from school, when they left in the morning, everything was fine and cheerful. They came back from school and they're either showing some obvious or subtle signs of their emotions to you. What information do you have? You may not, because sometimes teenagers not openly tell you, like, this is exactly why I'm upset. Are they giving you any other hints? They just came back from school. Maybe it's school related. Maybe it's grade related. Maybe something to do with teachers, something to do with friends. So take note of what hints, what information is there. Based on your relationship with your teenager, what they're willing to share, what hints they're dropping, what you have seen previously, what do you see every day? Do you have enough information to make an educated guess And then what's also really, what makes this process a bit more tricky is there could be emotional miscues. And what are emotional miscues is that internally, inside us, we might be feeling something, but that emotion is so threatening, is so vulnerable, is so sensitive that we actually don't have the courage to express it, and we express it in a different way. So let's take an example of a teenager who have really high expectations for themselves. They want to be, they want to get into medicine when they grow up. They're also an immigrant, and they know that their parents have made many, many sacrifices to move to this country. And once they have moved here, the sacrifices don't end. Parents are constantly sacrificing. On a side note, I also research the mental health of teenage newcomers when they first move to Canada. And one of the most common responses I get is, I feel so helpless when I see my stressful parents. And they think that I don't know their stress. And to protect them and to protect their ego, I don't tell them that I understand their stress, but I keep this within me. And that makes me really stressed out to see how my parents stressed, to see my parents stress. So going back to a teenager, a 16-year-old teenager, also an immigrant, moved to this country, know the parents have made many sacrifices, but all of the sacrifices will be worth it if a child grows up and does fantastic things with their career. And it's not only because of this parental dream. This 16-year-old teenager also have their own dream that I want to do something in medicine. In order to do something in medicine, I also need to get really, really high grades. And they wrote a chemistry test. They studied hard. They thought they studied hard, but they got a 73%, which particularly in grade 11 and grade 12, for many teenagers, they could call it a bad grade because, let's be honest, it's quite competitive to get into universities for life sciences or other biology. So if you think about what is that internal emotion is, we may not realize that there might be shame. The shame is because they have done something wrong. They might disappoint their parents. They might disappoint their own dream, right? They were here to be really, really successful. But shame is a very, very threatening and vulnerable emotion. And not just teenagers, I think many adults were quite scared to go inside us and really label when we're feeling shame. So what might come out outside is actually anger. Coming into the house, slamming doors, mom or dad's asking, what's up? And they're like, don't talk to me. And just going into the room. They're angry. And you must be thinking like, that looks anger. That's really, really loud voice. They're being disrespectful. So it gets really tricky to really understand sometimes what exactly the emotion is. But I just wanted to take this moment to just give an example that how complex emotions could be. And what this child actually really need is indirectly reassurance that it's okay, just one test, right? Like we know that he had worked hard. No, you're not going to disappoint me. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh, I have no hope for you just because you got a 73 on a test. But as a parent, it's also hard for you to really understand that because all you're seeing from the outset is this really, really angry teenager who's slamming doors. So if you have enough information, if the situation is obvious, you may help the child to label the emotion. But sometimes we might not have enough information to be really specific. So we can use more general language like, sounds like you're really stressed out about something. Something is going on, right? So how do we say it? When we see doors slamming, they're disrespectful. And again, as we say, we cannot be emotion coaches 100% of the time. Fatigue, their own responses, our own stress will come in the way. But days where we could be emotion coaches, it could be really tempted to say that, how dare you come to my house and slam my door? That's not how people in this house react. And that may not be sometimes as effective to really start that communication going or help them to regulate. Something that you might say instead is, sounds like school was stressful today. If you can just imagine as somebody who is angry, but actually internally ashamed because they got a 73 in their chemistry, they walk through their house. Yes, they're slamming doors because they're so angry and they're getting tension back that, how dare you slam the door? This is not how we react in this house. Versus a very neutral or even calmer voice saying that, it sounds like you're stressed out. Imagine how that might have felt for that teenager. But once, if we're able to label that they're stressed out or they're feeling angry or seems like you're sad, the next part, step 3, is validate. And that validation is not necessarily like, oh yeah, go ahead, I get it why you're slamming doors and you're screaming at me. Validation actually comes that you validate the emotion. And sometimes when people are like, no, like, I don't, I have rules in my house. I don't want my kids to come and slam doors. I don't have rules for my kids to stop screaming. And yes, those are fair, valid rules. But at that time, when your teenagers are really, really stressed out, reminding them of the rules may not prevent such situations to happen again, because it's not necessarily that the teenagers are consciously, intentionally breaking your rules of slamming doors. It's the emotions that led in this behavior. So in validation step, we are reflecting our tone, we're reflecting on our body language, we're reflecting on our facial expression, and we're verbally, with our words, communicating to our teenagers that we understand their emotional experience. If we are lucky and the teenagers have finally communicated that, yeah, I got a 73 in chemistry. Oh, I understand why you're stressed out, why you're frustrated, why you're angry, because chemistry is an important subject to you and you want to do well, and you didn't, even though you worked really hard. So I get why you're angry. This step, then they calm down, then they regulate, and then we can come back into how they can improve their grades in the future in chemistry. But at that moment when the teenager is slamming, there will be a different effect when you just take time to validate their emotion. So many of the times when we do emotional coaching with parents, they do the validation, but they do it too quickly and they move on to problem solving at that moment. And what I really want all of us to take away is that we cannot engage, especially our teenagers, I would actually argue most adults, we cannot engage in most effective problem solving when we are thinking from our emotional centers. When we are really heightened, when we are really distressed and our anger is that level 100, or sadness, shame, even sometimes if you're overly too happy, we actually cannot do work, right? So our emotions has to come down to a level where we're able to access the part of the brain that we need to really think of solutions, to be motivated. So many of the times, as adults, or even we sometimes do it like, oh, I know you're angry, but hey, bring out your textbook and let's do homework together now. But no, it's not, yes, I know that you're feeling angry, and I know you're feeling angry, but how about this? At that moment, we're just giving permission to let that emotion to be validated and sit and to be regulated. So rather than saying, but, or if, or how about, we're just telling them that we understand, or we might be understanding, or we might guessing how they're feeling. And we know that they're feeling this way because of this. Like, I know you're angry because you really wanted to spend time with your best friend, and your best friend may be really annoyed with you if you don't go to their birthday party, right? So you are really showing to them, and that's how we show empathy, is that when we, with our words, communicate, tell them that we understand their world, we understand their reality. Maybe as an adult, I don't understand the big deal of, what do you need to go and watch a movie when you can just sit at home in your relaxed couch and watch a movie here? But I understand that for you, that's such a big deal. So when we think, and I want now to take a moment, because we've been talking about our teenagers, but these attending, labeling, and validating would work in any sort of communication, whether you're doing that communication with a coworker, with their partner, with your spouse, with your supervisor, with your other kids. Validation works. So let's take an example, and let's actually put you as the target example. So imagine that you had a really, really stressful day at work. You had a coworker, and they were really mean to you. They said something that was very insulting and humiliating, maybe personal or emotional. They insulted you. And you're feeling angry because that was a personal attack, right? A boundary has been reached. Like, this person has no business telling me this thing. So you come home, your mom, your dad, your parent, you don't get to slam doors. You don't get to throw things. Your brain is more developed. You can regulate a bit more. But you're showing subtle signs of anger. Maybe you are about to make food and you're cutting your vegetables really fast. Or maybe you're gently slamming the fridge door. Maybe you just want time on your own, you're sitting on the couch. Maybe you're on your phone, right? And then your child walks in and just be like, Mom, hungry. What's for dinner? Oh my God, you're so slow. Snack. Oh, why aren't you not talking? What's wrong? Versus, imagine if our teenagers was also in this workshop and they were learning this emotion coaching skills, and they're attending that, sometimes when I walk into the room, Mom usually looks up and smiles at me and tells me how I'm doing. She asks me what I want for a snack, but she's not even making eye contact with me, and she's just like aggressively cutting all the vegetables. Maybe she's stressed out. She just came home from work. Maybe something happened at work. Maybe just telling her that I need food, or asking her too much question about, like, oh, how was work? Maybe your teenagers just sat across the table from you and just be like, Mom, seems like you might have had a bad day at work. And he understood your need. Maybe you were really angry, and even as a parent, you just needed time on your own to regulate. Your teenager grabbed a soda from the fridge and just walked away from you to give you space, rather than constantly asking, so when's dinner? Can I help you? Can I make it faster for you? Because at that time, you just needed your own space to deal with anger. You didn't need extra help today. You actually do not want to talk to anybody because you were so angry. And your emotional need was you need to be left alone and cook. And that's what your teenager did. They just walked away from you because that's what you needed, rather than be like, are you sure you don't need help? Can I cut the broccoli? I'm really hungry. What can I do to make this faster for you? So maybe this was just a brief example of how just labeling, attending, labeling, validating, and the next step that we're going to talk about, meeting the emotional need, might just help you to regulate after someone who had a bad day at work. When you're also validating what really happens, what is a message that you're telling your teenagers when you're validating their emotions? Your teenager is listening from you directly that it's okay to have emotions. Many of the times when we don't talk about emotions, we tend to think that certain emotions are negative, unhealthy, and you're not allowed to have them. But the reality is, all emotions are valid. Yes, behaviors and actions could be unhealthy, but if somebody insults you, of course you will be angry. And it doesn't mean that you're weak because you're angry. In fact, you're strong because you're able to feel and label the emotion you have. Because that emotion will tell you what do you need to do to maybe stand up for yourself next time a coworker is mean to you. You're also telling your teenager that whatever this emotion that I'm having, even the shame of getting a 73 in chemistry, I have parents, I have people who love me, who would support me in this emotional experience. And I'm not silly, dumb, or stupid to have this emotion. And over time, validation may really slow down that cycle of what unmanaged, unlabeled, unregulated emotion can lead to. And if you're able to attend, label, validate, maybe we're not able to label exactly, but we're just calling it stressful. The most important step is meeting the emotional need. So if you think about the parent example that I provided, that mom, that dad, that parent just needed their own time to really ground themselves and on their own. They just, even though the teenagers may have the best intention of helping the parent to get dinner prepared more quickly, you as a parent just needed time and space. And the teenager provided that emotional need. They just walked away and gave you that space. So we go back to the table that we had from last week, is what is helpful action to when there is an emotional need? When there is anger, they might need more space and separation. When there is sadness, especially for teenagers, it's actually very developmentally healthy for people to learn how to soothe and manage themselves. So when they're sad, it's developmentally okay for them to sit in their room. When they're scared, we want to make sure that the threats or the danger that making them feel scared is being modified or reduced in the environment. So whatever the emotional need is, asking yourself, what is it that our teenagers need at this time? Do they need space? Do they need someone to even silently sit with them? Do they need reassurance that, no, I wouldn't be disappointed? This is not, you don't need to really hide your actions. What is it that they need? But I talked about this last week, that when we think about emotions, we often get confused by fear and anxiety. And when we think about fear, is something, the emotion that we feel when there is actual real threat and danger in our environment. So if there is something in our environment objectively that is causing fear in our teenagers, we support them to reduce or minimize that threat or danger. But anxiety is not the same as fear. Anxiety is when we anticipate that there might be threats and danger in the future. And because we're talking about future threats, it might be the case that that threat and danger may actually not be there, or may not be there in that magnitude or intenseness. So fear is real threat. Anxiety is when we think a situation is threatening when the situation may not be threatening. And anxiety is just not an emotion. Emotion is just part of it. But anxiety also comes with thoughts that tells us things will go wrong, things will go badly. It also comes with a bodily reaction. So if a child is feeling anxious, sometimes with support and sometimes a lot of resistance, the need is actually for the child to expose themselves in the environment to actually take note that, oh, this is actually not as threatening. So that's why we have to differentiate that if there's a real threat for our child's life, then we need to support them in minimizing the threat, versus is this more of an anticipated threat? But as we talked about, step 1 to 4, attend, label, validate, and meet the need. I always honest and transparent that theories and strategies and interventions seem way more easier and doable in textbooks and in webinars than in real life, because our life is not linear. And some of the things why emotion coaching may be difficult. The first is teen vulnerability. Many of the times, in children, it's much more easier to do emotion coaching because they're much more open to talking about their emotions. They're much more open to tell you what the situation is. But teenagers, there could be very vulnerable and personal, and it might be very threatening for them to tell their parents that they're having some weak situations where they might need help. So we always want to look for invitations, opportunities, where they might want to talk about emotion. I also want to give you a heads up that if for a very long time, since childhood, if we actually haven't really talked about emotions, if emotion is not a daily language or vocabulary at our home, it would be quite abrupt to start doing emotion coaching when, as parents, as teenagers, in our communication, we don't really talk about emotions a lot. So in that case, we need to first start talking about emotions, normalize emotions, and not just like, tell me how you feel, teenager, but labeling out emotions in less threatening way. We can start with like, oh, like TV character, or talking about our own emotions first. Because that normalization is because then the teenager is getting signs and signals for you that, oh, we do talk about emotions at home. So there's that readiness and practice of talking about emotions too. As you said, there might be days where you are stressed out, where you have your emotions really high, and there might not be space for you. You might not be in a mindset to have empathy. This is not the day where you can take perspective, and that's okay. Showing kindness towards yourself. And sometimes if we are not getting any invitation or signal from our teenagers, and all we're getting is the behavior, the one thing that is within our control is to meet the emotional need. And we have Maria who's going to talk about collaborative problem solving.
Yep, thanks, Maisha. So the last step of emotion coaching is collaborative problem solving. And with this step, it's important to monitor how your teen is consistently reacting. So those first 4 steps, they're used to reduce that emotional escalation in your teen. But if you're seeing that your teen is consistently having long periods of these big distressing emotions that are maybe hard to predict, or maybe they're really interfering with their lives, then in those cases, we have to look to this step of collaborative problem solving. So sometimes those 4 steps are enough and you've met your teen's need, but it's different if that only happens once in a while, where they're, sad sometimes, angry sometimes, than if you're seeing that your teen is getting really angry, really sad a lot of the time. And it comes to a point where maybe, for example, they're so sad that they're not hanging out with other people, not just their family, but others in their life too. Maybe they're acting very closed off, or you're seeing that they're very anxious, or things are making them nervous, or they're having angry outbursts. So it's really, in those cases, when they're having those big emotions all the time, then that's the indicator that you'll need to collaboratively problem solve. And these are some things to think about when you're going to engage in this collaborative problem solving. So first, we can ask, does this teen need coaching in learning goal-directed behaviors? And as an example for goal-directed behavior, maybe at home, I'm thinking about Maisha's example, the teen is getting very, very escalated, and they're throwing things, slamming doors, saying unkind things to their parent when they're really angry. So that's an unhealthy behavior, and the goal there would be to reduce that behavior. So in that case, in order to reduce the behavior, the teen would then need to learn how to manage their anger and learn strategies. And that goes along with that second point there, where the teen needs to develop those strategies to sort of de-escalate in those situations and regulate their own emotions. And the next point, just thinking about the environment, you may also need to pay attention to what's happening at home. So are there certain things that always start these arguments, or are there things that always seem to bring about this big anger in the teen? So maybe things at home would need to change as well. And then the last point there is thinking about whether it's time to collaborate with others. So let's say, using our example, you figure out that the arguments between you and your teen and the angry outbursts, they only happen when you talk about schoolwork with them. And maybe it turns out that your teen is really struggling a lot with their schoolwork for whatever reason. And then that stress comes out as those angry outbursts. So in that case, maybe you need to decide whether your teen should get tutoring, if you can support them in that way. And with their permission, maybe talking to the school or talking to their teacher so that they can get extra help. So again, if you're finding that you're providing the need and they're not able to calm down, then that's your indicator that you and your teen probably have used up all those tools that you have, and now it's okay to incorporate the external support systems. Like I mentioned, teachers, could also be counselors, community leaders, to support your teen. So then when you decide that extra support is what you really need, we can kind of think about it as coming together and sitting at a table to go through the collaborative problem solving. And if we go back to that example again, your teen is having these angry outbursts, and the root cause is because they're not doing well in their science class or math class, let's say, and they're stressed out about it. So which supports would you invite to come sit with you at the table and problem solve? Well, in that example, it would probably be the school, the teen's math teacher, and any other external supports. And maybe even along with the school issues, them struggling with math, maybe it makes them feel really bad about themselves. they're having constant negative thoughts about themselves. So maybe in that case, you invite a mental health professional to the table, right? And then you can decide if community supports or community programs would be important for your teen. For example, community tutoring, and then incorporating that into your problem solving. And the reality is that the step is really tricky. It's probably the trickiest part because it does involve the collaboration of both you and your teen. And sometimes the parent, you as the parent, might be ready to sit down at that table, bring all these supports and resources to solve the problem. But then it's the teen who might not recognize it to be a problem, or they're not convinced that these people can help, or maybe they have their own worries about being part of the problem solving. So in that case, it can be really tricky because this stage really needs that readiness and that buy-in from your teen. And we kind of have to recognize that sometimes youth might not come to the parents first for help, but even so, there's ways that you can indirectly let your teen know about resources that they can reach out to on their own. Like casually mentioning leadership groups, school supports, counseling supports, and also not saying it in a way like you have to do this, but more phrasing it as, hey, these are your options. I'm not watching for you to do this exact thing or use all of these things, but that just might trigger an idea in them, and give them resources that they can reach out to on their own if they're more comfortable with that. And if it's really hard to communicate with them, or maybe they don't want to talk to you, then that external support could be really helpful for them. But we hope, if we consistently engage in that attending and labeling and validating and meeting their need first, and you're doing that consistently, then that hopefully opens up a way for your teen to have better communication with you. So you can engage with them in that problem solving part if it's needed in the end. And if your teen is very resistant, maybe it means that those 4 steps that Maisha talked about would need to happen for a longer period of time so that the teen's more comfortable with talking about the emotions and going through those steps and coming to a solution at the end with you.